Hello everybody, happy Frog Friday. My name is Carly and these are the top 10 worst books I read in 2022, or the books that I should have DNF'd but didn't. The first book that had the honor of making it onto this lovely list was To Paradise by Hanya Yanagihara, which I was super excited for because I loved her other book, A Little Life. However, this book was unfortunately very boring. To Paradise is split into 3 separate sections, all 100 years apart, in 1893, 1993, and 2093, and all revolve around the same townhouse in, I believe, Manhattan in New York. They each follow a different couple and the various problems that they have in their time period. While all these stories do take place in the same area, none of them are actually connected to each other in any way. They're all 3 distinct separate stories. The first story, which takes place in 1893, is sort of an alternate history type of story where the norm is for couples to be same-sex rather than opposite. The problem that you're following with this relationship is a wealthy man falling in love with a poor man. That's pretty much it. There's not much to it. The whole time you're wondering whether or not they're going to become a couple, stay together, whatever. And you may think you would find out that answer of whether or not they stay together by the end of the 200 or 300 or so pages that this story is. But no, it ends on a cliffhanger right when things are starting to get good. They decide they're going to move out west together, and that's it. You never learn what happens to them. The second story, which takes place in 1993 during the AIDS epidemic, follows a young Hawaiian man who's living in New York and who has a much older gay partner. I don't remember them actually talking much about the relationship in the story, but it was more of a look back at the Hawaiian man's life as a child and his relationship with his father. This was honestly the worst of the 3 stories. I didn't care for it at all. It was just about a dad who loved his plot of land more than his son and was kind of going crazy for it, I think. I don't know. It was not memorable at all. And then the third story, which takes place in 2093, is my favorite of the 3 stories, but that's not saying much because, again, nothing really happens in this story. It also goes on for way too long. It's pretty much the same length as the other 2 combined. I don't think I mentioned it either, but this is around an 800-page book with all 3 disappointing stories that just goes on for way too long. This book came out in 2022, so I don't know whether she wrote this 3rd story after the pandemic started or if she was working on it before, but it is about a major pandemic and isolation and quarantine, all that type of stuff. It follows a heterosexual couple living in the pandemic and the relationships they make with other people that they're not necessarily supposed to be making. Overall, it's too boring and it's too long. Also, I forgot to mention, but all 3 stories, the characters have the same names, but they're not related at all. So it does get kind of confusing because you'll get used to the characters in the first story having a name, and then in the second story they have the same name but they're different characters and you're still thinking of the first characters, if that makes sense at all. I have no idea why she chose to do that. One other thing is, if you like learning new words when you're reading books, maybe this one's for you because I had to stop all the time to Google what words meant. The next book I'm going to be talking about is The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, or Matt Haig. The Midnight Library is a library that only exists between life and death. The library is filled with an endless number of shelves where each book is filled with a different version of your life that would have happened if you had made different decisions. You're following the main character Nora, who is depressed and has decided that she no longer wants to live, so she ends up in the Midnight Library. Here she gets a second chance and you follow her exploring different books to see what different lives she could be leading. I think she was a musician in one life, like a rock star, and then like a glacier scientist in another life. However, something happens in each of these lives, and she ends up realizing that she actually does want to keep living. So somehow just seeing all these other cooler versions of her life made her change her mind. I think this is horrible representation of mental illness and just a fantasized version and not realistic at all, which is a shame because he actually has another book which is more of a memoir self-help type of book that I give 5 stars. and I thought was a much better representation, and it's called Reasons to Stay Alive. So the author does have experience with mental illness, but I don't think he portrayed it right in this story. It also just ended up being more boring than you would think. It was just kind of the same thing over and over again. None of the stories went into depth at all. Next up, we've got First Person Singular by Haruki Murakami. This is a collection of 8 short stories told in the first person by our narrator, who is a lonely man, because of course it's a lonely man. This is Murakami. It's gonna be a lonely man. They take place in different points in his life, some being from his childhood and some being as an adult. It kind of seems like it's part fiction, part memoir from Murakami's life himself. This isn't bad, so to say, it's just kind of meh. It's very forgettable. I don't remember a single story from it, and I read it last year. Next up is Haig by Kiersten White. This book sounded like it was going to be so good. It's set in an amusement park and there's 14 contestants. Their goal is to hide inside of this amusement park for 7 days and not get caught. If they don't get caught after a week, they're promised a large sum of money. However, these contestants don't realize that when they're caught, they're actually killed, so their goal now is just to survive. My biggest complaint about this is that it's marketed as an adult, but it's clearly written as a YA book. Besides the characters being not memorable at all and so one-dimensional, being referred to as like the social media girl or the prank girl, 2 of the 14 main characters have the exact same name, Ava. Why would the author choose to do this? She commonly refers to them as Ava. No, not that Ava, the other Ava. It's so annoying to read, so frustrating. Also, the ending and the twist and the explanation was just so stupid, so dumb. I'm not even gonna get into it. If you read it, you know what I'm talking about. Next up is Fever Dream by Samanta Schweblin, which is a Spanish translated work. I had absolutely no idea what happened in this book, so I'm gonna read the plot synopsis for you, but I guess that means the book kind of achieved its goal. It is called Fever Dream. A young woman named Amanda lies dying in a rural hospital clinic. A boy named David sits beside her. She's not his mother, he's not her child. Together they tell a haunting story of broken souls, toxins, and the power and desperation of family. If that sounds interesting to you, maybe you'll be able to understand it better than I did. Maybe I just don't have a critical eye. For me, the only redeeming factor of this one was that it was super short and I got through it really quickly. If it was a long book, I probably would have DNF'd it, and I don't DNF books, so that's saying something. Next up is Popisho by Leone Ross. I'm gonna be honest with you, I chose this book solely for the cover. That is one of the prettiest covers I have ever seen. I still love the cover, so I wish I had loved it. I don't even really know how to describe this book. It's about an island called Popisho, where all of the people on the island get some sort of power, magical power, that's called cores. This book, which is pretty long, takes place only over 1 day. One of the main characters that you're following, Xavier, is referred to as the Macaneus, and he has one of the most respected and important powers on the island, which is that he can make anyone their perfect meal. Each day he invites a couple people from the island to have their one important meal that they're gonna get over their lifetime. However, the governor's daughter is going to be getting married, and the governor is demanding that this Macaneus Xavier make a whole feast for everybody with his powers, which is just not something that he does. People have to wait their turn for their one meal. There's another character that has healing powers that's trying to find someone that she loves. There's another person going around the island spreading gossip, criticizing people by painting graffiti around the island. There's just way too many characters in the story and different point of views. It's more of a no plot, just vibes type of story. Very weird. I really like the magic system, and I think that's why I kept reading, because I liked reading the descriptions of people's different powers and stuff. It also gets very sexual, but it is described in the summary as a sensual story, so I should have expected that. And I have a feeling you probably don't understand how weird I'm talking about here. I'm talking about all the women on the island's uteruses falling out and them having to push it back into their bodies, and one person having their uterus stolen. That kind of weird. Next up was Weather by Jenny Offill, and this book was awful. I thought it was way too disjointed, and the only thing I appreciated about it was that it was super short. I had to look up the summary for this again because I couldn't remember anything about it. It's about our main character, Lizzie, who is a librarian, and an old mentor she had named Sylvia contacts her. Sylvia's famous for running a podcast and wants to hire Lizzie to help her respond to the mail that the podcast receives. So Lizzie accepts the job and helps answer all these questions by using the knowledge that she's learned from all the books that she's read as a librarian. People are asking social, political, and climate questions. I feel like the author wanted to address a lot of these topics critically, but they just didn't go into depth at all. In my opinion, she missed the mark. The next 3 books on my list are unfortunately all Asian translated books, which I really wanted to love all of these. I'm still trying to find translated fiction that I love. I have a feeling it's something about the translation that messes it up for me, and that maybe if I knew the original language and read the books as the author originally intended, that maybe I would like them more. I don't know. But I know it's not only that, because there are some authors who have translated work that I do like Kafka on the Shore by Haruki Murakami. That's a translated work, but I love that book. This first book is probably my most unpopular opinion out of the entire list, and that's Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. This book is translated from Japanese. This is about a girl named Kiko who's a little bit odd and doesn't really understand social norms, and she gets a job at 18 years old at a convenience store. She's happy there because she can finally fit in for once and feel like a normal person. She's got the store's manual that tells her exactly how to interact with others. She's able to copy the dress code and mannerisms of her coworkers. She ends up staying at this job for 18 years, and she's super happy. She has no plans to quit now, but everyone around her, from her coworkers to her family, keep pressuring her to find a husband and find a real job. So the author's kind of commenting on our current work culture and societal norms with pressure to conform. I feel like I've only seen good things about this, but for me, it's just too boring. It's a slice of life story, but nothing happens in this book. It's a no plot, just vibes book, which is fine if it's something like The Night Circus, which has interesting vibes and an actual atmosphere. But this one just gives me nothing. In my opinion, it just got way too overhyped. I never heard anyone say anything bad about it. So maybe it's just me and you should give it a shot. I don't know. Maybe there's something wrong with me with this book. Next up is The Vegetarian by Han Kang, which is a Korean translated book. One night, a woman has a nightmare about slaughtered animals, so when she wakes up, she suddenly decides to turn vegetarian. Everyone around her is uncomfortable and angry with her decision. This book is split into 3 parts. The first part was fine. I thought it was realistic in showing the response of those around her and the pushback against her decision, but then the second part turns sexual out of nowhere. It's basically about her being filmed having an affair with, I think, her brother-in-law, and it being disguised as art. And then the third part just ends with her in a mental institution and spiraling into mental illness, all because she stopped eating meat. It's just dumb in my opinion. I just was not feeling this book at all. I was grossed out by it and thought it was stupid all around. I know a lot of people think it's super meaningful and love it and think it's really creative, so I don't know, maybe give it a shot and let me know what you think. Lastly, we have Life and Death Are Wearing Me Out by Mo Yan. And like the title says, this book wore me out. This book was translated from Chinese. This is about a landowner in 1940s China who gets sentenced to death and sent down to hell. He is eventually able to convince Lord Yama, who's the ruler of the underworld, to give him another shot at life and be reincarnated. He's sent back to his same farm, but this time he's a donkey. He's brought back as a donkey, an ox, a pig, a monkey, a dog, and a big-headed boy. I think I may have enjoyed it more if I was more knowledgeable on Chinese history, because they kind of talk about it a lot without actually fully explaining it. I was super intrigued by the premise, but I think after the first 2 animals or so, it just got repetitive and all the intrigue was lost, so I just got bored with it. You also have to hear a lot about his sexual thoughts while he's an animal, and him following through with those sexual thoughts with other animals, so that's a fun thing to read about. There was also just so many characters that it was hard for me to remember who was who, and all of them were awful people. Even the main character I didn't really care for, so there was no one to root for, no interesting plot. There was really nothing keeping me reading. I don't know why I didn't DNF this book. And that's it for my worst books of 2022. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. Let me know down below in the comments what your worst book of 2022 was, and if you've read any of these books, what you think of them. Maybe you completely disagree with me. Let me know down below. For today's frog fact, I'm going to be talking about frog sounds. Female frogs actually don't make sounds at all, so when you're out late at night and you're by a pond or something and you're hearing tons of frogs chirping, those are all males trying to attract females. Thanks again for watching. I hope you all have a great day. Goodbye. Blah, I can't say that line.